Welcome to Cisco Live. I'm Kulkarni. I work as a senior technical leader in CX security. I'm excited to present a session on migration of IPS policies from Snort2 to Snort3. The agenda of today's session includes covering the basics of intrusion, looking into various aspects of actions when it comes to Snort2 rules versus Snort3 rules. Then we'll move on to intrusion policy UI elements, where we will look at from a UI perspective what changes when one migrates from Snort2 to Snort3. We all have custom rules in our IPS deployment. Now these custom rules needs to be migrated from Snort2 to Snort3. So we'll look at a quick demo on how do we migrate the existing custom Snort2 rules to Snort3 rules so that the IPS functionality is kept intact. Last but not the least, we look into firepower rule recommendation. Now, rule recommendations have been an integral part of any IPS deployment, wherein the system looks at the traffic specific within the network and then comes up with recommendations on what are the signatures that needs to be enabled or disabled in the IPS policy. Towards the end, we'll summarize through what are those key takeaways from this session. The goal of this session is also to ensure that it addresses two important points. The first one being, if you are a customer who is deploying a new IPS in the network and you choose to have the base version as 7.0 or above, you would have Snort3 as the default engine. So this session will help you in getting around Snort3 IPS policies and the know-how of how to set up IPS policies so that they can be deployed in the network. Now, if you are an existing customer who are already having a IPS deployment in the network and it is running with Snort2 IPS policy, this session will help you in knowing how do we migrate the existing Snort2 rules to a Snort3 rules and thereby come up with a strategy on a seamless migration from Snort2 IPS policies through Snort3 IPS policies. So let's begin our session with the first topic, which is intrusion basics. Now, what do we mean by intrusion basics? Whenever we have intrusion systems deployed in our network, the deployment will be either in detection mode or in prevention mode. So let's look at what's the difference between intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. When it comes to intrusion detection, the systems are deployed in the network in such a way that they receive a copy of the actual traffic that is passing through the network, which means it is passively monitoring the network traffic. Now, based on the configuration that we have with regards to the signatures that are enabled as part of IPS policy, whenever the copy of the traffic that is passing through matches a particular rule or signature, an action would be generated wherein it generates an event to notify the system administrator that an alert is triggered. However, the systems deployed in this mode do not have capability to drop the traffic or modify the inline traffic. These systems are known as intrusion detection system. Moving on to the next mode of deployment, which is intrusion prevention system, also known as inline deployment. Now, in this case, the device will act as a bump in the wire where it inspects all the traffic that is passing through it by evaluating them against the signatures that have been enabled. Based on the matching condition, it would trigger the action associated with that signature. For example, if we have a signature that is configured to drop the packet when it matches the said signature, what happens is, in addition to generating an event, the system would go ahead and drop this particular offending packet if the system is in inline mode. Now that we know what is intrusion detection system and what is intrusion prevention system, let's have a look at how does this translate into firepower products when they are deployed in either intrusion detection or prevention mode. Now, since we are looking at it from a perspective of Snort2 and Snort3, if you have an IPS policy which is configured on top of Snort2 as the engine, you will see that there is a checkbox which is available against every intrusion policy, which helps you determine whether the system should be evaluating this IPS policy in detection mode or prevention mode. The option here is drop when inline. Now this option by default is enabled, which means whenever you create a new intrusion policy on Snort2, by default it is enabled in prevention mode, which means it will drop the packet if the action associated with a matching signature is set to drop. When we disable this particular option, the IPS policies will be evaluated in detection mode only. By this way, the network administrator has a control on how do you want a particular IPS policy to be evaluated in the network, whether it should operate in detection mode or it should operate in prevention mode. Similarly, in Snort3 world, when you create an intrusion policy, rather than having a checkbox, as in case of Snort2, you would see a drop down available which would help you determine what the mode of operation is. You can choose between a detection mode and prevention mode. From a functionality standpoint, it is exactly identical to what you would have in Snort2, but the naming conventions are a little different, which is Snort2 has a checkbox associated with the IPS policy to determine the mode of inspection, whereas in case of Snort3, as users, we have to select which mode we want the policy to be deployed in. Moving on. Now that we know how do we set IPS policy into either detection mode or prevention mode, let's have a look at what are the different actions that we can configure against the signature in Snort2 world as well as in Snort3 world. To begin with, let's take a look at various options that are available when it comes to signatures in Snort2. If you log in onto the Firebar management system and take a look at IPS policy, there's something called as rule state, which is associated with every signature. And the rule state helps us determine what is the action taken when a specific packet matches the signature that is present as part of the IPS policy. If you look at the text box which is highlighted in red, you would see that there are three options available as part of Snort2. The first one being generate events, followed by drop and generate events, and the last one is disable. What do these actions mean when they are associated with a particular signature? Now, if the signature is configured with the action of generate events, whenever a particular traffic matches this particular signature, the system would generate an event to alert the trigger of the signature. However, no action is taken in either modification of the packet or dropping the offending packet. The next one, drop and generate events. If the action associated with a particular signature is drop and generate event, in addition to generating an alert to notify the network administrator about the signature trigger, it goes ahead and drops the offending packet. In this case, we are actually taking action on the packet that has triggered the signature by dropping it. Last but not the least is disable. We would have a bunch of signatures where the actions are either by default set as disable, or as part of customization or a configuration change, we would need to disable a particular signature. Now, the action disable means the signature would not be evaluated against the traffic that is passing through the box. So this signature with action as disabled is excluded from traffic evaluation. Moving on to Snort3. What are the different actions that are available against signatures that are present? Now, if you look at the actions on Snort3, you would see that there are more than 3, and you would see some new additions to it. The actions are block, alert, rewrite, pass, drop, reject, and disable. These can be set against every signature that is present as part of your IPS policy. Now let us take a look at what each of them mean. When a particular signature has an action configured as pass, the system now would stop evaluating all the subsequent signature once it encounters a particular signature with action as pass against the packet that is passing through the unit. Now, we should be very careful when we have the action associated with a particular signature configured as pass, because it would just stop the subsequent evaluation. Alert. Now, when we have a signature configured with the action of alert, it is identical to generate events from Snort2. An offending packet matches a signature with action as alert, it would notify the system administrator by generating an event. The functionality remains intact from a perspective of how generate events functioned in Snort2. The equivalent in Snort3 is alert. Now, the action block. You would see that there are two actions, block and drop, and there is difference in both of them. When we have the action associated with a particular signature configured as block, what it means is once a packet matches a signature with action as drop, it would drop the offending packet as well as go ahead and block the remaining session too. So in this case, the outcome is drop of the offending packet as well as the session which has this packet is also blocked. Moving on to action as drop. When the action is configured as drop, it would just drop the offending packet, in contrast to block, where the entire session is also blocked. In case of drop, the session remains intact, but only the offending packet is dropped. The additional actions are, in addition to what we have covered so far, include rewrite, reject, and disable. Let's take a look at what rewrite means. As part of Snort signatures, there are options available in order to create a signature. Now, if we use the option of replace as part of any signature writing, in that case, the option of rewrite is needed against that signature. Basically, it would rewrite certain parts of the packet or modify the packet. A rule with action as rewrite, which does not have the replace component within the signature, would have no effect because it does not find anything to replace or modify the packet. So it becomes kind of mandatory to have the replace option available in signature if we have to use the option of rewrite as action against it. The next option is reject. When we have the action associated with a particular signature configured as reject and an offending packet against this signature is triggered, the system would now send either a TCP reset or ICMP unreachable message to the host from which the traffic was initiated. Disable, this is identical to what we had in Snort2. When a rule has an action associated as disable, it means the system will exclude this particular rule from evaluation against the incoming traffic onto the system. Now, what you see on the screen is a sample example of how a rule looks in Snort2 configuration versus how it looks in Snort3. It is evident that a rule written in Snort3 is much more readable and structured as compared to what we have in case of Snort2. This brings us to the end of section 2, which was actions associated with rules. Now we'll move on to the third section, which is intrusion policy UI elements. Now in this particular section, we will look into the UI aspects of how things have changed from Snort2 IPS policy to Snort3 IPS policy. What are the new additions which a network administrator should look into, and how they impact the configuration that are present, and how they can be leveraged in order to migrate from Snort2 IPS policy to Snort3 IPS policy. When you would log in onto a system which is running firepower version 7.0 and above, the reason the emphasis on 7.0 and above is because starting 7.0, we have both Snort3 as well as Snort2 on the FMC, because you might have certain deployments where they are running lower releases with Snort2 engine and new deployments that would run on Snort3. So from a UI standpoint, when you navigate to the intrusion policies page, you would see subtle changes, some new options being available. Now we'll go into what these new options are and how they would enable us to have Snort3 configuration and IPS policies deployed on the system. So on the screen, you would see 5 numbers marked, and these are basically those new options which are available. The first one being show Snort3 sync status. Then we have a column which shows us what are the base policies that are associated with intrusion policy. Now, this was also present in case of a system which is running on Snort2. However, it is more readable when it comes to the UI in 7.0 and above. The third one being IPS mapping. Now, IPS mapping tells us about how the rules are mapped from Snort2 to Snort3. We'll deep dive into what are the options that are available as part of IPS mapping, followed by a version that is associated against each intrusion policy that we have listed on the screen. So every policy that you have on 7.0 and above would have a Snort2 equivalent of it and a Snort3 version equivalent of it. The reason behind this is to ensure that in case of hybrid deployments, like we discussed before, you might have certain systems which are working on Snort2, while certain new deployments would be working on Snort3. This ensures that the management of IPS policies from both Snort2 perspective and Snort3 perspective is simple enough. Let's look at each of these new additions in detail. The first one being show Snort3 sync status. Now, there are two aspects of it. One, when you do a hover over it, it would give a short description on what functionality it provides. Additionally, it is also a clickable link. First, let's have a look at what is that on hover message which is shown when we hover over show Snort3 sync status. Now, on versions that are 7.0 and above, it is very crucial to understand what happened to our policies that we had configured on Snort2. What are the changes that has happened to our existing Snort2 policies, how they have been migrated to Snort3 policies, and what is the current sync status associated with them. So this is what the functionality is of show Snort3 sync status. Now, when we click on this particular option, because it's a clickable link, you would see a screen similar to this. Against every IPS policy that is present, you would see a small sort of drop down with a green arrow, which again is clickable, telling about what is the current status of that particular IPS policy from Snort2 to Snort3. Now, on the screen, if you look at the text box which is highlighted, it is one of those balanced security and connectivity policy, which is based on the underlying base policy of balanced security and connectivity. The text box says the Snort3 version is in sync with the Snort2 version of the policy. Like we discussed earlier, when you have a system which is upgraded from a version below 7.0 to either 7.0 or above, you would see that all the existing policies are migrated to a Snort3 equivalent version by the system automatically. So the sync determines what is the current status of this policy when it comes to Snort2 as well as Snort3. The policy under concern here, balanced underscore security underscore connectivity, you would see that the Snort3 version of this policy is in sync with Snort2 version. Now let's take a look at connectivity over security as a policy. You would also see that the Snort3 version of this policy is in sync with Snort2 version. Now if we take a closer look, we see that there is timestamp mentioned against some of the policies, while connectivity over security and maximum detection does not really have a timestamp associated with when the sync was completed. Now, the reason for this discrepancy in showing the timestamp is for any policies that you had created as part of IPS component before you upgraded to 7.0 and above, you would see a timestamp in front of those IPS policies, which is corresponding to the time when the FMC was upgraded. Hence, if you look at balanced underscore security underscore connectivity, security underscore over underscore connectivity, and test custom IPS. These are those policies which were present in the system before the FMC was upgraded from a version lower than 7.0 to a version 7.0 and above. Hence, the timestamp is identical on all these three policies. However, the other two policies which are present, connectivity over security and maximum detection, were created on the system after the Firepower Management Center was migrated to a version 7.0 and above. Now, when we create a new policy, the system automatically creates a Snort2 variant of the IPS policy as well as a Snort3 variant of the policy. And hence, you do not see a timestamp on when the equivalent policy was created. It is basically at the same time. But for the policies which were present before the upgrade, you would see a timestamp associated against each of those policies. Now, at the start of this discussion, I did say that the green arrow that you see is again clickable, which would give us in detail of what really happens as part of the sync. So let's quickly take a look at that. So when you click on that green arrow, you would see a pop-up window which comes in, which tells you a summary of the built-in utility which migrates the Snort2 policy to Snort3 as part of the upgrade process. Now, these policies are migrated from pre-7.0 version to 7.0 version. In order to get further details, we can download the entire summary detail in the form of CSV, which tells what are the signatures that are migrated. Now, this becomes important because there would be instances where we would want to validate if the sync of a policy which was created on IPS as part of IPS on Snort2 has successfully completed to Snort3. So you can have this summary detail downloaded. It gives you an overview of the entire process. Now, let's look at the second option which was available, that is the IPS mapping. Now, as part of signature updates, there are pre-canned policies which are present on the box. Now, these pre-canned policies are updated at regular intervals, and these are provided as part of profiles that the customers can use when you start your deployment of an IPS system. These policies include balanced connectivity and security, connectivity over security, maximum detection, security over connectivity, and no rules active. Depending upon the profile that is chosen, the number of signatures that are enabled or disabled vary from each pre-canned policy. Now, as part of migration, when you upgrade your Firepower Migration Center from 6.x version to 7.0 version, all these pre-canned policies are automatically migrated. So these pre-canned policies would have an equivalent in Snort2 as well as in Snort3. However, if we try to look at the number of rules that are enabled in these signatures in Snort2 version versus Snort3 version, you might run into a situation where the count of the signatures that are enabled may not be equal. The reason behind that is a rule in Snort2 might be split up into multiple rules on Snort3, or alternatively, multiple Snort rules can be migrated into a single rule into Snort3. There is no like-to-like migration purely from a count standpoint. The functionality would remain. However, there is a possibility that the number of signatures that are enabled in a particular IPS policy would differ from a Snort2 version of it to a Snort3 version of it. What you see on the screen is just a sample UI depiction when you log in onto a Snort2 policy. This is how a Snort2 IPS policy looks like when you try to edit it. The same when migrated to Snort3, you would see it's a little different from a UI standpoint. However, all the functionalities are still present. So this is how a Snort3 UI policy looks like when an attempt is made in order to edit it. Now then, quickly recapping what we covered as part of this section. The most important questions that we answered in this section are: why is the sync shown only for some policies and not for the other? Why is the sync date not current and it shows the date when the firmware was actually upgraded on the FMC? We also answered the most important question of why do we maintain Snort2 and Snort3 version of the same IPS policies. This is to ensure that in case of hybrid deployments, it makes the life of network administrator easy, and you don't really have to have two different FMCs to manage Snort2 devices separately as well as Snort3 devices separately. This brings us to the end of this section, and the next section now is migration of custom rules. As we covered in the agenda, that we all have custom rules which we have created on top of the rule updates that are provided by Cisco. These custom rules form a crucial and integral part of our IPS policies. In this section, we'll look into how do we migrate these rules as part of our strategy to move from Snort2 IPS rules to Snort3 IPS rules. When you navigate onto the FMC running version 7.0 or above and click on all the Snort3 rules that are available, as part of this UI, you would have an option to upload the custom rules. You can upload Snort3 custom rules, which are by default written in Snort3 compatible format. You can also upload Snort2 rules and import them into the system. The third option being you can upload the Snort2 rules, convert them into Snort3 rule writing language, and download the report on how the conversion has happened. Now let us take a quick look into a demo video of how this entire process works.
Hello and welcome to this video on Snort rule conversion in the Cisco Secure Firewall version 7. In this video I'm going to quickly demonstrate how to convert your custom Snort2 rules into rules that will work with Snort3. We're going to start off by going to the Objects menu where you'll find the rules that we have already created for Snort2. Under Objects Intrusion Rules, I'll click on the Snort2 All Rules tab. Easiest way to find your local rules is to go up here and go to the Local Rules category. So I have a number of Snort2 rules here I've created, and what I want to do is I want these rules to be imported and converted so that they'll work in Snort3, because Snort3 uses a different rule syntax. It's very similar, but it is actually more consistent, different ways to separate keywords, and they are not compatible. So Snort2 rules will not work with Snort3. To convert those, I'm going to go over to the Snort3 All Rules tab here. And once you arrive at Snort3, you'll have all rules selected, so you can just leave that there on the left. Now on the right we have this tasks drop down, so I'm going to click that. So you have a couple options here when it comes to conversion. They're under Snort2 here. In the Snort2 heading you have convert and import or convert and download. You can use convert and download if you simply want to convert your Snort2 rules to Snort3 syntax and download them in a file. If you use convert and import, it's going to convert 100% of your Snort2 rules into Snort3, and it's going to place them into a single new custom rule group. By using the convert and download option, again, you can convert those, download them as a file, then you can re-upload those as separate files if you want in different categories of rules. So let's go over this one first. So convert and download looks like this. When you click it, you get a dialog here that explains to you that Snort2 rules are not auto-converted when you upgrade, and what this is going to do is convert those and download them. So you click OK. It will just quickly convert those rules, and you'll get a file you can see down on the left called customrules.txt. Here's what the converted rules look like. It's basically a text file. You can even see some comments within the file explaining some of the changes between Snort2 and Snort3. At this point, your options are to simply re-upload the entire file, edit the file, maybe break it up into smaller files. To upload your converted files, go back up to Tasks, and then under the Snort3 option, pick Upload, and then just point to the file there. Another option we have for importing rules is the convert and import. So again, what convert and import will do is just do this in one step. It'll basically convert all those rules that we just saw and then import them immediately into the local rules group. So let's see what that looks like real quick. So convert and import, similar dialog to what we saw already, basically saying the same things, that Snort2 and 3 are different. This is going to convert all your Snort2 local rules to Snort3 rules. So click OK. Again, that conversion process is pretty quick, and it just says, okay, they were successfully imported. If we look over here on the left now, we can see we have a local rules group. We have a group called All Snort2 Converted Global. This one rule group now contains 100% of your Snort2 to 3 converted rules, and you can now go to the policies and enable those as you see fit. That does it for this quick overview of Snort2 to 3 rule conversion. As always, thanks for watching and happy snorting.
Now that we have seen how to migrate our custom rules from Snort2 to Snort3, this brings us to the last section of this presentation, which is firepower rule recommendation. Now, firepower rule recommendation has a slightly different UI when it comes to Snort3 as compared to Snort2. So what you see on the screen is a firepower rule recommendation UI for Snort3. You would see that when you navigate to this screen, there's the option to select a security level associated with rule recommendation, a checkbox option basically to accept the recommendation to disable the rules, and then there is a section to configure what is called as protected network. Let's take a look into what each of these mean and how do they relate to a rule recommendation and how we can use them effectively. Let's have a look at the first one, which is security level. The security level option is a tile style of selecting what we want as the base security level. Now, the 4 tiles represent 4 different security levels. The lowest one being lower security, followed by higher efficiency, focus security 1 and focus security 2. So if you have selected 3 tiles as part of this option, it would mean that the security level associated with firepower rule recommendation is focus security level 1. Similarly, if a single tile is selected, it just means that it is at a lower security. What do these security level mean? Now, if we have the security level set to lower security, it means it would disable all the rules from the IPS policy except the ones that are present as part of connectivity over security base policy, which matches the potential vulnerabilities from discovered host. Now, what are these discovered hosts? Discovered host means as part of our network discovery, the traffic that is generated from the network is identified by the system, and based on this discovery, if there are hosts applications that are identified which match a potential vulnerability, and that vulnerability signature is available in connectivity over security as a profile, that would be enabled. All other rules would be disabled in case of lower security profile if selected as part of security level. The next option is higher efficiency. Now, when the security level associated with firepower rule recommendation is set to higher efficiency, it would retain all the existing configured rules, but it goes ahead and disable those rules which are not applicable based on the discovered host. It would retain the existing rules. If there are discovered host which matches a particular vulnerability, those rules are enabled, but if it does not match any of the vulnerabilities and we have additional signatures, it would go ahead and disable that. The next level is focus security. The underlying IPS policy for focus security is security over connectivity. Now, in this case, all our existing signatures that are configured are retained. On top of it, based on, again, the discovered host, it would recommend us to enable the rules which are applicable to vulnerabilities that are potentially found on these discovered hosts. Last but not the least is focus security level 2. This uses maximum detection as the underlying policy. where the number of rules that are recommended as part of discovered host would be higher in number. Focus security 2 is usually recommended to be used when you are testing the system and not in production network, because this may impact the overall performance of the box. To summarize, security level setting allows the network administrator to choose what is the underlying base IPS policy that needs to be considered for generating firepower recommendation. And based on the signatures that are available in the base policies, additional signatures are enabled or disabled depending upon the vulnerabilities that are identified as part of discovered host. Moving on to the second option, which is a checkbox to select whether we want the recommendation to disable the rules or not. In this case, what happens is whenever the rules are recommended as part of firepower recommendation, at times we see that some of the signatures which were configured by network administrators are disabled. And this takes network administrators by surprise on why was a signature disabled. So in Snort3, this option enables us to select whether we want firepower recommendation to disable the rules or not. If the option is unchecked, it would not make any changes to the existing rules, and it would generate a report which the network administrator can go through before applying or taking action on the signatures that are recommended. The last part that we would cover as part of firepower rule recommendation is protected network configuration. By default, you would see that there is no value selected in protected network, which would mean that it is covering any IPv4 and any IPv6 that are present in your network, which would mean it includes even the public IP addresses. When it comes to firepower rule recommendation and customizing the signature, we would want to specify the networks that we want to monitor as part of recommendation so that the customization of the signatures is very precise. In an ideal case, you would want custom network objects which include the networks and the servers that are hosted internally in your network to be part of this protected network. So when the protected network is configured with a specific subnet, the rule recommendations would be generated based on these specific subnets that we are monitoring as part of network discovery. Just to conclude this session, let's have a quick look at how the rule updates would work when we have a system which is running with Snort2 IPS policies as well as Snort3 IPS policies. In this case, when you navigate to the rule update part of the FMC, which basically indicates what are the rule updates that are getting downloaded, you would see two packages being downloaded. The first one being what we refer to as VRT, which is applicable for Snort2. So all the IPS policies which are present in the system that are Snort2 variant, the signature update would happen as part of this VRT update. Similarly, the Snort3 version of those IPS policies will be updated by the LSP package, which is downloaded. LSP stands for Lightweight Security Package, and this is relevant to the IPS policies which are configured on Snort3. So in a hybrid deployment, which includes devices that are running on Snort2 as well as devices that are running on Snort3, you would see two updates being downloaded as part of rule updates on FMC. Well, this concludes the session for today. So before wrapping up, let's quickly go over the key takeaways on the topics that we covered so far. Exact rule mapping might not exist between a Snort2 and a Snort3 version of the policy. Meaning, if you have a Snort2 policy of balanced security and connectivity, the number of signatures that are present in Snort2 for this policy might not be equal to the number of policies that are present on Snort3 version of the same policies. We did cover about what are the factors that we need to take into consideration. A single snort policy might be split into two, or multiple snort policies might be aggregated into a single Snort3 policy. Migration is one way, meaning the policies are migrated from Snort2 to Snort3 and not the other way around. So we'll have to take into consideration that when we migrate, FMC, which is running version lower than 7.0, the UI allows you to have only Snort2 policies. Hence, the migration is from Snort2 to Snort3. Additional parameters such as thresholds and separations that we might have configured as part of Snort2 signatures will not be migrated to Snort3. Threshold separations have to be configured manually when you complete the migration from Snort2 to Snort3. Local rules or custom rules, as we discussed, which are part of our IPS policies, will not be migrated as part of upgrade, and these have to be migrated manually through the built-in tool available. Now, if you have firepower recommendations that are being used as part of Snort2, these recommendations would have to be generated again on Snort3 because the recommendations are also not migrated as part of the built-in process to migrate IPS policies from Snort2 to Snort3. So with this, we come to the end of today's session. I hope this was useful. There were some key takeaways that you would take back, and it would help you in managing the existing IPS policies. And if you are planning to migrate to Snort3, this session would have helped you in getting to know the basics of things to take into consideration while we plan to migrate from Snort2 to Snort3. With that said, thank you everyone for listening through this session. And to continue your education, you can visit the booths, book the one-on-one Meet the Engineer session. You can explore the DevNet labs, capture the flag event, and also explore the walk-in labs. There is an on-demand library available for more sessions, which can be accessed at the link that is present on the slide. Once again, thank you everyone for listening through this session, and I hope it was useful. Thank you.